Welcome back. I want to start off this morning and ask, who is it that you most look up to in life, apart from maybe your parents? Why do you look up to them? Who do you listen to when you're looking for information of what to believe, what's going on out in the world, what are our sources, or who are our sources of information and truth? And do you just take this person or these people at their word because you look up to them or because you trust them? So I want to start with the premise this morning. Do you know what a logical fallacy is? If you take part in debate or discuss things at great length with people, as we all do, sitting around the dinner table or out with some friends, undoubtedly you have given into a logical fallacy at one point or another. If you're unfamiliar with this terminology, please look it up. I don't have, unfortunately, time to go into an exhaustive detail of what a logical fallacy is, but there are definitely ones that people use time and again. Now, a logical fallacy can be simply defined as a logical error in argumentation, reasoning, explanation, rhetoric, or debate. And there are hundreds of named logical fallacies, but one that we want to think about today is one that we deal with in everyday life. And at some point, we have all fallen victim to at one time or another. And one that the Lord in this passage specifically teaches against. In our passage today, Jesus' audience makes an appeal to authority. It's a logical fallacy in which we argue that a premise or an argument is valid because it is given by someone who is an authority or an expert, someone who has the right credentials. Or that an argument is invalid because the person lacks the right authority or title or credentials. So let's take a look at the text today and see what we're talking about. So today we're in John 7. We're going to look at the first 14 verses to give some context to what we're talking about here today. It says this: After Jesus went around in Galilee, he did not want to go about in Judea because the Jewish leaders there were looking for a way to kill him. But when the Jewish festival of tabernacles was near, Jesus' brothers said to him, "Leave Galilee and go to Judea, so that your disciples there may see the works you do. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world." For even his own brothers did not believe in him. Therefore Jesus told them, "My time is not yet here. For you, any time will do. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify that its works are evil. You go to the festival. I am not going up to the festival because my time is not yet fully come." After he said this, he stayed in Galilee. However, after his brothers had left for the festival, he went also, not publicly, but in secret. Now at the festival, the Jewish leaders were watching for Jesus and asking, "Where is he?" Among the crowds, there was widespread whispering about him. Some said, "He is a good man." Others replied, "No, he deceives the people." But no one would say anything publicly about him for fear of the leaders. Not until halfway through the festival did Jesus go up to the temple courts and begin to teach. So just real fast here, right? We're talking about Jesus going to the festival, the Feast of the Tabernacles, this great festival in Jerusalem and in Judea and the surrounding areas. And Jesus here, he's challenged by his brothers. They're kind of thinking like he's just trying to get famous. He's just trying to be the next big thing. And so they say, "Hey, why don't you just go up to Judea? Let all your disciples see all the wonderful things you're doing." But he doesn't want to go to Judea yet because he knows that the religious leaders were conspiring to kill him. They were looking for some way to take him and put him to death. Now his brothers, thinking he's just trying to become famous, live the easy life, whatever. They say, well, why don't you just go up? Everybody's going to be there. You can raise your public profile. And Jesus says, nah, I think I'm gonna just chill out at home for a little bit. But then at some point he changes his mind and he's gonna go up. And as he goes up, the reader is made aware that the religious leaders are watching out for him, right? And not only that, but the people themselves they're whispering amongst each other about him. Some saying, hey, he's a great guy, and others saying, nah, he's a deceiver, he deceives the people. But no one would say anything publicly about him for fear of the leaders, right? And we'll come back to this in a little bit. But let's go on, because we want to hit the meat of what we're talking about here today. So that's in verses 15 through 19. The Jews there were amazed. Remember, it's about halfway through the festival, and Jesus is now in the temple courts, and he begins to teach. And the Jews there were amazed and asked, how did this man get such learning without having been taught? And Jesus answered, my teaching is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me. Anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak it on my own. Whoever speaks on their own does so to gain personal glory, but he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him, he is a man of truth. There is nothing false about him. Has not Moses given you the law? Yet not one of you keeps the law. Why are you trying to kill me? So now we get into this logical fallacy, right? This appeal to authority. They say, all the Jews there are amazing. They ask, how did this man get such learning without having been taught? They were saying, this guy, he doesn't have a college degree. He's not a professor. In those days, they would say he's not a rabbi, like all these other leaders. Where did he get all of this teaching? Well, remember back to Luke 2, that Jesus grew in wisdom and stature. Yet it wasn't because he was taught in the traditional way. He didn't have degrees, okay? If you were to come back to my house, I have a degree from Philadelphia Biblical University. And in my basement, I have a little wood shop where I build stuff. And on my workbench sits my degree from PBU. And it's covered in a pretty thick layer of dust. Because if you work with wood, you just get sawdust everywhere. Now, you might ask, aren't I proud of it? Why don't I have it prominently displayed on a wall somewhere? Well, sure, I'm proud of it. I put a lot of work and time and effort and money into that degree, but what I've learned over the years is that degree essentially means that I learned enough information in a short period of time to pass a test, to get a grade, to get a piece of paper that says I'm qualified to teach about the Bible. But you know what the problem with that is? There's a lot of people out there doing what I would very loosely describe as teaching about the Bible that have degrees and have qualifications, and what they're teaching isn't true. You see, Jesus had no degrees. He had no official title handed out by some institution or government. And Jesus faced these questions often. If you read through the Gospels, by what authority do you teach this? By whose authority are you going about and doing these things? Where have you learned such things? But see, these are the wrong questions because they're based on a foundation of logic that declares unless something comes from an expert whom I trust, it's not true. Rather, we ought to examine the information or argument that someone is presenting, regardless of whether or not a college or other institution has given them some credential which lists them as an expert. In fact, I would argue that if the strength of someone's argument rests on the fact that this is what all the experts say, then they likely don't have a good grasp of what they're talking about. And they're just trying to pass it off to you that, well, because other people who have these degrees or these credentials say it, it must be true. But notice Jesus' reaction to this. My teaching is not my own. It is from the one who sent me. It's the Father's teaching. He's calling out to God. He's saying it is God's teaching. And then he challenges the people. What does he say? Anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether or not my teaching comes from God. You see, in Jesus' day, there was this rabbinical tradition that, in essence, put a barrier between people and going to God on their own. And it was the traditions of the rabbis and the oral law. And you can look all this stuff up on Google. There's lots of great information out there about it. But Jesus says, if you do the will of God, you will find out the truth. If you do the research, you do the will of God, you will find out whether what I'm saying is true or if it's a lie. See, Jesus says, don't just listen to me. Go and seek it out for yourself. Whoever speaks on their own, he says, does so to personal glory. I am seeking the glory of the one who sent me, and that is a type of person who can be trusted. But even in that, he says, go and do it, and then see whether or not what I'm saying is trustworthy. And so he appeals to Moses, right? He says, Moses gave you the law, yet you don't keep it. And you say, well, what does that have to do with anything? You know, it kind of seems like Jesus is just pulling Moses out of left field here, right? Well, no. Because remember that Moses had all the credentials of a leader, right? He was raised up in Pharaoh's household. He was living with one of the princesses who had adopted him. So he received all the best training of Egypt. And not only that, but he also receives the training of who he is and who his people are from his mother, who ends up becoming his wet nurse. So he's received the right secular training, he's received the right sacred training. And so Jesus points out, even with the right credentials, you're not listening to Moses. So what does it matter whether or not I've been taught by a certain rabbi or a certain religious tradition when the one who was taught like that, who you all point to over and over again, you don't listen to him? And so he says to the crowd, why are you trying to kill me? Now, he's not speaking necessarily to the average person, right? But remember what we said back related to verse 13. That no one would say anything publicly about Jesus for fear of the leaders. Because look what it says, verse 20 through 24. You are demon-possessed, the crowd answered. Who is trying to kill you? Jesus said to them, I did one miracle, and you are all amazed. Yet because Moses gave you circumcision, though actually it didn't come from Moses, but from the patriarchs, you circumcise a boy on the Sabbath. Now if a boy can be circumcised on the Sabbath, so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for healing a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly. So they say to him, right? Who's trying to kill you? You're being ridiculous. And the people here are being a bit facetious. Because remember, they were afraid themselves to say anything positively or negatively in public about Jesus. Remember, they were whispering, yeah, no, I think he's a good man. No, I think he deceives people. The people knew the leaders had it out for Jesus. But look what Jesus' response is. He kind of ignores the question because he knows it's, in essence, a type of diversion. Because he's getting to a truth here that is intrinsic to who we are. Because intrinsically, research and finding things out for yourself is difficult. And it's way easier just to find an expert or a teacher who will tell you what it is that you want to hear. And because they have the right credential or authority or whatever, you automatically say, well, they must be trustworthy. Well, Jesus says, I did one miracle and you're amazed. Now, what's the miracle that he's talking about? Remember a couple weeks ago, we were talking about the healing at the pool, right? That the man was lame and invalid from birth, and he couldn't get down to the pool when the waters were stirred up. And so Jesus heals him, and he tells him, pick up his mat and walk. And he does so, and we find out it's a Sabbath, and the religious leaders are really upset because Jesus has, but in their eyes, Jesus has broken the Sabbath. Well, he goes to circumcision. He says, okay, let's talk about Moses, right? Moses gave you circumcision. And to keep the law, to keep from breaking the law, because according to the law, a baby boy had to be circumcised on the 8th day, even if that day fell on a Sabbath. He says, well, to keep from breaking the law, you circumcise a child. Circumcision causes pain. But it's lawful on the Sabbath, right? Whereas, he essentially says, I made someone whole. You took a piece from a person, which causes soreness and pain, and I took a person in pain and made them whole. But yet you're calling it unlawful. You see, he gets to a very important point here. He says, stop judging by mere appearances. Look deeper. Judge correctly. Judge for yourself. Don't just listen to someone you respect and assume they are right. That leads to a lot of bad things in the world. So I want to say in closing, I appreciate you looking at this video today. Okay? But just because I'm here with a camera on me and a microphone and I'm putting this on YouTube and it's getting shared on Facebook, doesn't mean that I can't be wrong. And it certainly doesn't mean that you ought to take everything I say as gospel truth. Don't just take my word on anything. Rather, examine and judge whether what I'm saying is true, regardless of whether or not I have a degree hanging on the wall over my shoulder. What I'm saying is true or it's not. But my credentials, my authority, has nothing to do with it. But I want you to not just apply that standard to me or in church, but in every aspect of your life. Just because a leader you follow, whether it's a government leader, a social leader, a business leader, a news leader, whatever, just because they say something that you agree with, don't just take their word for it either. You know, we've become this culture of memes, right? We just share all these little memes on Facebook. I just saw one the other day that said, "Don't believe everything you read on the internet." And it was a quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln. Well, the quote is true. Don't believe everything you read on the internet. But obviously Abraham Lincoln didn't write that. But see, we share things and we don't think about it because it's from someone we trust. And we think surely they did the homework to make sure that what they're sharing is right. Probably not. They probably just hit that share button and didn't think about it because they liked what that thing said, regardless of whether it's true or not. Don't be deceived. Because the truth is this. There are a lot of people who would seek to deceive you. In fact, we have an enemy in the world called Satan, who is the father of lies, who from the very beginning, all the way back to Adam and Eve, has sought to deceive us. And there are a lot of other institutions that do the same. Political parties, news organizations, and you might say, well, I trust XYZ news organization, and the news organization on the other side of the political aisle, they're not trustworthy because they're on that side. Well, no, that's not how it works. We can't trust someone just because they're this news agency or this government agency or this secular or sacred institution. That's certainly not what Jesus says. He says, rather, verify. Titles and degrees and credentials mean nothing if the person's premise is false. We must judge according to two things. This is where we'll end. First, is it true according to Scripture? And second, is it verifiable if it is something that Scripture doesn't directly address? The source of absolute truth is the Scriptures. There's nowhere else. But the second premise, the second objective that I gave you there, is it verifiable if it's something that Scripture doesn't directly address? Well, Scripture doesn't necessarily say that 2 plus 2 equals 4, but 2 plus 2 equals 4 is something we can verify. 2, 2, 4. It's verifiable. But everything other than the things that fit under those two premises should be taken with a grain of salt and treated with a healthy dose of skepticism. Because there are agendas in the world to get us to believe, to get us to side with one group or another, one leader or another, simply because they say, well, I am an authority on these things. Don't show me your credential. Show me the truth. And I hope that you have that same attitude. As we said last week, we all need to learn to think for ourselves. That's the end of our video for today, and we're glad you stopped by and took a gander. You know, if what you've heard here today has been helpful, if it's been good for you, if it's helped you with anything, then we certainly ask you comment, let us know what was good for you. Hey, maybe even something that wasn't so good for you that we can improve on. You can hit like, subscribe to us on YouTube, share us on Facebook. It helps us get the word out, lets other people know that there is truth to be found in this world where so many would seek to deceive. We thank you so much. Have a great day. God bless.